Hello and welcome to Subtly Interested. My name is Riley, and this is part 1 of explaining mythical weapons and items from Norse mythology. All the weapons and items we're going to be talking about today actually all surface from the same story, so that's basically what we're going to be focusing on. Let's get started. First up is Mjolnir. And at this point, it's iconic. I know what it is. You know what it is. You've probably seen it make an appearance in the Marvel Cinematic Universe with Thor played by Chris Hemsworth, and more recently in God of War Ragnarok. And speaking of which, I can actually provide a little bit of a visual as to the difference between the two. So first we'll take a look at Thor's hammer from the MCU. It's basically a giant sledgehammer head with a short handle. I liked it when I first saw it, but like as time went on, I just kind of hated it. It's kind of ugly to me now. But I also have Mjolnir from God of War Ragnarok. It's immaculate. I love it so much. And you can see it has a much larger hammerhead and a much shorter handle, but I like this one a lot more. It's more accurate to what we see in the mythology, but obviously there's never going to be one perfect replica. But we're not just here to talk about the way it looks. We're also here to talk about where it came from. So let's get into that story. So it all starts when Loki makes the extremely smart decision to cut off Sif's hair, who is Thor's wife. And when Thor found out, he was understandably very upset. So much so that he threatened to break every bone in Loki's body, but in a desperate act of self-preservation, Loki tries to make a deal. Loki pleaded with Thor that he would let him go to Svartalfheim, the home of the dwarves, in hopes they would craft Sif a new head of hair that would be much more beautiful than the hair that she had before. And Thor, in his mercy, let him go. So Loki goes to Svartalfheim and he approaches the sons of Ivaldi, a highly famed dwarven smithy, and he basically convinced them under the guise that they needed to almost prove themselves that they were the best dwarven smiths in the 9 realms. And they agreed. So they crafted Sif's hair, but they also crafted 2 other items. The first being Skidbladnir, which roughly translates to assembled from thin pieces of wood. It was later given to Freyr, god of fertility, along with something else, but I'll get into that in a little bit. It was imbued with a specific type of magic that whenever the sails were out, the wind would always favor it. It was also large enough to carry all the gods with their armor and their weapons, all at the same time, with room to spare, but it could also be folded enough to where it could fit in your pocket. I wish my car could do that. The second item they crafted was a spear named Gungnir, which means swaying one, and it was later given to Odin, king of the Aesir gods. It's said that the spear was so well balanced that it would never miss its target whenever it was thrown, regardless of the skill of the person wielding it. It's basically the cheat code of weapons in Norse mythology. Spears were also the primary weapon used by real Viking warriors, so it's not that much of a surprise that the god of war and the chief god of their religion also used a spear. In fact, in one story, before a battle between the Aesir and the Vanir, which I'll explain that in another video, Odin is described as throwing a spear over the Vanir's heads before the battle begins. And although the story never explicitly says that the spear was Gungnir, real-life Vikings were also said to have thrown spears over their enemies' heads before battles began as well, to sort of invoke Odin. So there's that. Anyway, so after accomplishing his task of getting Sif her new head of hair, Loki travels back to Asgard and makes peace with his brother. Except that he didn't. Instead, he chooses to approach 2 brothers, Brokkr and Sindri, who are also famed dwarven smiths, with a challenge that they couldn't produce 3 items that were of equal value to the ones made by the Sons of Ivaldi, which were kind of like their rivals, right? And to taunt them even further, he bets his own head that they can't do it. And with everybody already not liking Loki, the dwarves gladly took the challenge. So Brokkr and Sindri began to go to work, but Loki would not let them work in peace. You see, as Sindri was working on his first item, Loki, disguised as it describes them as a fly, but obviously flies don't have stingers. Anyway, he stings Sindri on the hand as he's working. But when Sindri pulled his creation out of the fire, it's none other than a bright-haired golden boar. A living boar. The name given to the boar was Gullinbursti. Could be saying that wrong. Don't flame me. It was basically a giant glow-in-the-dark boar that could run faster and better than any horse, as well as run on water and in the air. Gullinbursti was also that other item that I was talking about that was given to Freyr later on. So he got the boat and the boar. The second item Brokkr and Sindri were actually working on together, and as Loki stings Brokkr on the back of his neck, Sindri pulls out the next item, which happens to be a ring. Later known as Dropnir or Dripper, this ring was also magical, which on every 9th night it would produce 8 new identical golden rings, each with the same weight. So it was basically an infinite money glitch, which is pretty cool. But now comes the last item. Now it's an item that Brokkr and Sindri recognized they needed to be particularly careful in crafting because things would get messy if they messed up. But of course, with his head on the line, Loki stings Brokkr in the eyelid so that he couldn't see what he was working on. It said that he bled enough to where he literally couldn't see out of his eye, but they finished anyway. And even still, after all the distractions and Loki being an absolute menace, out of the fire comes a hammer of unsurpassed quality, Mjolnir. And from what I could find, there wasn't really a consensus of what the term Mjolnir actually means, but the main translations include lightning, white, based on the purity of white lightning, which is a little sketchy, and then others just being Thor's hammer or hammer of the thunder god. Some of the features of Mjolnir include that whenever it's thrown, it never hits its target, kind of like Gungnir. It basically acts like a boomerang, so whenever it's thrown, it always comes back. And the one we pretty much all know by now is that it held the power of lightning. And Thor was very happy to receive this gift. It was responsible for the deaths of a lot of giants, but it was also used to bless things like marriages, births, and funerals. So there's that too. So those are the 3 items crafted by Brokkr and Sindri. And Sindri, though, was kind of upset with the hammer because while Loki was distracting Brokkr, the handle was messed up and it was shorter than they intended, and Sindri thought it was going to be ruined and the gods would hate it, but they wanted to bring it to Asgard anyway. They just said, screw it, we're going with it. But Loki beat them back to Asgard, and seeing that their treasures were just as worthy as the sons of Ivaldi's, he stole them so that A, he wouldn't have to fulfill his promise, and B, he could present them to the gods himself. So he appears before the gods, and he gives Thor Mjolnir, obviously, and Sif's hair, also obviously. Odin was given Gungnir and Dropnir, and like I mentioned earlier, Freyr was given Skidbladnir and Gullinbursti. And he must have been pretty thrilled because he was not part of this dispute at all in the beginning, and then he was just kind of around and then walked away with 2 like super dope things. And after everything was all said and done, Sif's got her hair back, the gifts are all handed out, people are happy, people are playing with the new stuff like on Christmas morning. Loki thought he was in the clear. But then the gods know about Loki's deal with Brokkr and Sindri, and they say, you know, they made stuff that was equal to the sons of Ivaldi, and we think you should uphold your bargain with them. And with Brokkr and Sindri approaching him with a knife, he says, I promised the dwarves my head, not my neck. At this point, Brokkr and Sindri are basically just over it. So they are just content with sewing his mouth shut, and everyone moves on. So that's it, that's the story. So there's 6 of some of the most iconic mythical items and weapons found in Norse mythology. Thank you so much for watching. This was the very first official video of Subtly Interested, and to be honest, recorded this, it was kind of a train wreck, but we got there in the end eventually, I think. Anyway, like and subscribe if you want to, and I will see you in the next video.